Very well, thanks.
I've got a couple of quick things here. Been a Democrat since '64 because when the Republicans started dividing America with their Southern strategy, I just couldn't put up with that. But
all of that in our video library at cspan.org. The U.S. House gaveling back in for votes.
Will be taken in the following order. Ordering the previous question on House Resolution 738 and adopting the House Resolution 738 if ordered. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. The remaining electronic vote will be conducted as a 5-minute vote. The unfinished business is the vote on ordering the previous question on House Resolution 738, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Calendar Number 151, House Resolution 738, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 4078 to provide that no agency may take any significant regulatory action until the unemployment rate is equal to or less than 6.0%, and providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 6082 to officially replace within the 60-day congressional review period under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, President Obama's proposed final Outer Continental Shelf oil and gas leasing program 2012 through 2017, with a congressional plan that will conduct additional oil and natural gas lease sales to promote offshore energy development, job creation, and increase domestic energy production to ensure a more secure energy future in the United States and for other purposes.
The question is on ordering the previous question. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
Before the House gavelled out briefly, they had been debating the rule for two bills. One of those bills would replace the Interior Department's offshore leasing plan with one that would open additional areas to oil and gas development. The other bill would reduce federal regulations. This is the previous question vote. A vote on the rule is coming up next, rule for both of those bills. We expect debate on the offshore bill this afternoon and debate on the federal regulations bill later on in the week. Also today, the House will take up a bill under suspension of the rules by Congressman Ron Paul, which would call for an audit of the Federal Reserve. Congressman Paul was our guest this morning on Washington Journal, and we'll show you as much of that conversation as we can as this vote continues.
Congressman Ron Paul, Republican of Texas, serving his 12th term. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you.
You have a bill that's getting a run-through in the House this week. Tell us about what it would do to audit the Federal Reserve.
Well, it'll do exactly that. We will be once again, or matter of fact, for the first time, be able to audit the Fed. The Fed's never been audited. It's been around for 100 years, and their budget is much, much bigger than the Congress. You know, during the crisis, they generated $15 trillion worth of credit that they loaned out in secret. And the Constitution is very clear. Monetary policy is responsibility of the Congress. Oversight is responsibility of the Congress. But when they tried to clarify what Congress could do in the 1970s, they wrote a law that said, sure, you can audit the Fed except for some very important things like monetary policy and agreements with foreign banks, agreements with foreign governments and other central banks, and international organizations like the IMF. So my bill merely removes those prohibitions that allows Congress to perform its responsibility, and that is to audit of the Fed and get transparency of the Fed. And under these conditions, it has become more important. Matter of fact, the American people are very, very strongly in support of this legislation.
The details, as you mentioned, would require the GAO to audit the Fed's Board of Governors and 12 regional banks. It would require a follow-up report to Congress with recommendations for what to do, and it would have to happen within 1 year.
Right.
Well, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, has some pushback on this. You got to talk with him last week as he testified before Congress. Let's hear what he had to say.
There is, however, one important exception to what the GAO is allowed to audit under current law, and that specifically is monetary policy deliberations and decisions. So what the Audit the Fed bill would do would be to eliminate the exemption for monetary policy deliberations and decisions from the GAO audit. So in effect, what it would do is allow Congress, for example, to ask the GAO to audit a decision taken by the Fed about interest rates, for example. Now, that is very concerning because there's a lot of evidence that an independent central bank that makes decisions based strictly on economic considerations and not based on political pressure will deliver lower inflation and better economic results in the longer term. So, again, I want to agree with the basic premise that the Federal Reserve should be thoroughly transparent, thoroughly accountable. I will work with everyone here to make sure that that's the case. But I do feel it's a mistake to eliminate the exemption for monetary policy and deliberations, which would effectively, at least to some extent, create a political influence or political dampening effect on the Federal Reserve's policy decisions.
Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke testifying last week. Here's the headline on Reuters. Bernanke slams Ron Paul's Fed audit bill.
Well, I would expect him to, because he wants secrecy. When he talks about independence, he's talking about secrecy. And he talks about politics. I mean, it is a very political organization. What they can do is, he does not want the Congress to have oversight, but he talks to and works with the Treasury Department. He works with the executive branch, but the executive branch doesn't have the authority to manipulate monetary policy either. If he can give loans to private banks and private corporations in secret, how much more political can you get? And then be protected? He says the only thing that we want to have protection of is monetary policy. Well, that's what his business is monetary policy. He's the lender of last resort. He's the bailer out of last resort. He can spend $15 trillion off budget. And he said, well, we need to do this in secret. But the financial crisis has changed all this. I mean, that's ancient history. The Fed has been able to do that from 1913 up until 2008. But now the people want to know. They know how important it is. They're understanding how the Fed creates bubbles and how they claim they can come to the rescue and bail everybody out. And they need total secrecy so that they allow one company to go bankrupt and bail out the other company, bail out some banks, and then have no exposure and keep the information secret. I think that is ancient history. No, we don't have our way. We don't have a total audit. We don't have monetary reform yet. But the handwriting's on the wall. This system can't work. We've had an experiment, especially since 1971, when we went on a worldwide fiat dollar standard. It's never been done in the history of the world to have one single paper standard running the whole financial institutions. And that's coming to an end. I think when they look at the LIBOR scandal, our Fed was colluding with the European central banks in setting interest rates. And our central bank is always setting interest rates. That's their business. That's how they create money. But I think because of the failure of the policy, the transparency of the Fed is going to come, because it's going to become more obvious to everyone that the system cannot be maintained.
We have a tweet that's come in. DFW librarian writes in and says, everyone realizes Congressman Paul bill won't pass out of the Senate and reach the president's desk, right? So it's last act in last hurrah tour, referring to the fact that you are retiring from Congress. Have you moved the needle on this? Have you gained traction?
Well, I have other people talking about it. I would say yes. It's a big move. It's a big change. I've been talking about it for 30 years. But the last 5 years, we've gotten about 100 times more attention than we did for the previous 25.
Why?
So, no, it's, and this whole idea of downplaying, say, oh, he didn't get, he wanted it, he didn't have, monetary reform, and we don't have the full audit. But no, the knowledge is there.
So why has it changed in the last 5 years?
Because of the crisis and the realization that the Fed was responsible, because of education, because of the study of Austrian free market economics. Before, this was not well understood, but it's better understood now than ever before. And I think the other thing that's helped is the younger generation, for some reason, they're fascinated with this idea, and information is so much more available on the internet. And I have young people, I talk to a lot of them, and they're studying this, and it will change. Whether it's going to be changed before I leave Congress or not, most people realize, and I think she's correct, the Senate's going to give us trouble. But the attention keeps growing and growing, the understanding keeps growing. I work as much outside of the Congress, within the Congress, to change people's attitudes and understanding and help educate, because that's what you need first, and then the Congress will respond. And I think that's what's happening right now. The Congress is responding to the people waking up and realizing you know, how important this issue is. Up until now, they always just said whatever the Fed chairman says, we'll go along with it because they always solve our problems. It's not going to happen for any longer.
We'll go to the phones and hear from Sarah, who's a Republican in Edgewater, Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure having an opportunity to talk to you, Mr. Paul. You know, I'm a very big critic of the Fed, and because of the crisis, I did a lot of reading about it. But what troubles me is that it still seems that a lot of members in Congress don't truly understand the controversy about the Fed, how it was created, what it truly does to undermine the system. What I was wondering is, you know, would you agree with the statement that that America is bankrupt? That would be my first question. And the second one is, it seems that the United States as well as Europe, I mean, basically there's no more money to finance anything. And would a new financial system need to be implemented that also would include some form of debt forgiveness on a massive scale? That would be my question. Thank you so much, and it was a pleasure having an opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. You're right. The country is bankrupt. It has not been declared yet because the world still trusts our dollars. But we keep printing them, and the foreigners take it, and we buy goods. Yes, there's going to be monetary reform, and yes, there will be liquidation of debt. The only question is how does a country liquidate its debt? States and cities can liquidate debt sometimes by writing it off the books. Small countries can write their debt off, but they don't even like to do it. Spain and Greece should just wipe their debt off the books, but instead they're going to keep bailing out and pretending that they can salvage the system. But the ultimate goal of the Federal Reserve and all the monetary authorities is to get rid of the debt by reducing the debt in real terms, and that is just printing money. So if you have a national debt of $15 trillion and you devalue your currency by 50% and prices go up, you've just liquidated $7.5 trillion of real money. But that debt will be liquidated, but eventually the trust will be lost, and there will be monetary reform. There has to be reform because countries have done this for centuries where they have to finally restore confidence. But there's no way you can keep confidence going into a system where all you have to do is print more money. This is why Congress is irresponsible, because they always know the Fed is there. If they had to borrow that money in the marketplace, interest rates would go up, and this would all come to an end. So the Federal Reserve provides the incentive for Congress to spend money. Some like to spend money on runaway spending overseas and militarism. The others like to spend it on welfare, and they sort of get along, and then the Fed prints the money. But it's coming to an end, but exactly when that's going to occur, we don't know. But we are truly an insolvent nation, because if we had to pay all our bills today, it would be impossible. A tweet from Wild and Wonderful: if the Fed did not control our monetary policy, it would be in the hands of Congress. Yeah, that's so much more comforting. That's the tweet. But that's an incorrect statement, because when we were under gold standard, the Congress had a responsibility of guaranteeing that the dollar was as good as gold and that the dollar was a stable currency. So no, you don't have to have Congress. You don't want Congress to do it. I wouldn't think Congress might print even more than the Federal Reserve. But they'd bail out different people. They might bail out the mortgage holder and the farmers, where the Fed bails out the big banks and the big corporations and foreign banks and foreign corporations. So it's whose special benefits. So I don't want the Fed to bail out the very super wealthy, and I don't want Congress, to say that we can just print out money and bail out, every mortgage holder. What you want is the market to operate where the interest rates go up by the market, supply money comes into the marketplace, and if people go bankrupt, nobody bails them out. And they just have to write those debt off, and you wouldn't get these huge financial bubbles like the housing bubble and the NASDAQ bubble. That's all a creature of the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. Gary in Butler, Pennsylvania, independent line. Welcome.
Yeah, Mr. Paul, it's just it's a shame that you get your rightful media coverage. I just wanted to ask you about the UN Rio Plus 20. It was in Rio in June, I think, and it talked about an inclusive green economy, and it affects every aspect of our lives as a big country. Our lifestyles, behaviors, education, health, consumption, production, agriculture. And it wants to create an international monetary fund, might be according to a document, efforts need to be made to explore the potential for innovative size of an IMF potential world currency known as special drawing rights, SDR.
Let's get a response, Gary.
I think his concerns are justified, because I think those who manage the world financial system and those who manage our dollar both nationally and internationally know exactly what I'm saying, that this is destined to fail. So they're sitting around trying to make plans on what it should be replaced with. And I think they're absolutely right. They want to replace it with an international currency. They'd like to use the IMF. They're interested in world government. I'm interested in not even belonging into the United Nations. I don't want to give up our national sovereignty in any way, and I certainly don't want them to have the currency. So this is the plan that they have, and I don't want our country going to war under UN resolutions or NATO resolutions. I believe in national sovereignty. I believe in our Constitution, and that if we want to influence the world, we should do it by setting a good example, but not allowing international governments, international banks like the IMF do the job that we in the Congress should be doing.
Congressman Ron Paul, Republican of Texas, representing the 14th District. That includes Galveston, Lake Jackson, Victoria, and Freeport, serving his 12th term, also a presidential candidate. Let's go to R.I., a Democratic caller in Blytheville, Arkansas. Hi. R.I., you're on the air. Turn down your TV.
How you doing?
Good. Go ahead. You're on with Congressman Paul.
Yes, I thank y'all for what all y'all do for C-SPAN.
Thanks. Please go ahead. All right, we're waiting for you.
I just want to ask Congress Paul.
Yes? All right, state.
Why not Mitt Romney release his tax records?
Okay. Mitt Romney's tax
Well, I've
records.
made a statement on that, and I think the American people would like to see that happen. And I haven't volunteered to instruct him what he should do. I try to instruct myself what to do. But I think the American people have asked for it, and I've made a statement that it would probably be helpful to him, to let the people know if that's what they want, since he's, the likely nominee for the Republican Party.
Have you spoken with Mitt Romney?
I have off and
recently?
on over the many months. I've saw him a good bit during the campaign. So
Have you talked to him about endorsing him?
Not directly with him.
And do you have a plan for that you're willing to share with us?
No, I have no plan. We still have a convention to go to.
Well, tell us about the convention. We're getting some questions on our Facebook page asking what you're going to be doing in Tampa. Mark asks, will you be speaking at the convention? Whom will you invite to speak if you were scheduling the convention?
Well, I am scheduling a rally before the convention, and that'll be on Sunday. I'll be speaking at that rally. I had to have my own in order to speak. Now, I have not been invited to speak at the National Convention. It doesn't mean I absolutely won't be speaking at the National Convention, but as of now, I have not been invited to speak there.
And who would you like to hear from if Mark had his way and you got to pick the roster of speakers? Who are leaders in the Republican Party you'd like to hear from?
Well, unfortunately, I end up picking a lot of individuals who are probably more academically inclined than politically inclined. But, in our rally that we're having people around the country who have been successful during our campaign, who have become state chairmen, who have become nominees for Senate races that have great potential, and some are in office already. So there's quite a few. It's usually those who have been successful with the same message that I've been talking about, those individuals who believe in personal liberty, a different foreign policy, an understanding of the Federal Reserve, and a market economy. And we put this all together, and there's quite a few And with the risk of missing somebody, I'll just say there's quite a few, and they can look up the list of people who will be coming to our meeting on the 26th of August.
Here's how a story from USA Today describes the status of your campaign. It says you're no longer actively campaigning for president, but you've not officially suspended your bid. You're still in the running to that degree. Here's the latest GOP convention delegate count that we see from the Associated Press. With Mitt Romney, 1,522 delegates. Congressman Ron Paul, 158. Will you share any more with us about what your plan is at the convention in terms of releasing delegates or sharing your message of what you'd like to see at Tampa come out of the Republican Party?
Well, I look at this a little differently. It's not like I own my delegates. I'm not going to tell them what to do at all. But I would, at the convention, we'll probably clarify the numbers, because the way we count up all our delegates and all our alternates and people who are there that might not be able to vote for me on the first go-around, it's closer to 500. So that's a significant amount of a number of people who will be participating in the process and participating in the platform. So we'll just do what we can to promote what we believe in and what we think Republicans have said they believed in, because for years and years they've argued they believe in limited government. And the group of people that will be attending the Paul conference and our delegates, believe me, they are not looking for bigger government. This country doesn't need bigger government. And Republicans profess that they want less government, but we actually believe in it. We don't want to just cut on the proposed increases, and that's all that's happened for the last 30 or 40 years. Nobody who's in office, it's always tinkering around the edges. We want to change the philosophy of this government. It's the philosophy of liberty. It's the philosophy of the Constitution and defending everybody's individual rights. Congressman Ron Paul. Let's hear from Richard, who's a Republican in Corrigan, Indiana. Good morning, Richard.
Yes, good morning. Two questions. First, this was all intended for the previous speaker, but I got put on hold till now. First is campaign finance, and the other is morality in campaigning. I want to ask, why isn't the cost, the huge cost of the media, the press, put into this equation on campaign financing? I'm not talking about news. I'm talking about political analysis of the news. The amount of money contributed by Fox News and the liberal media to this whole campaign business is millions of dollars. That isn't figured into this equation, and it ought to be.
Okay, let's get a response from Congressman Paul, who's nodding his head.
I think he has a great point, because some people look at this very superficially and they say, why is there so much money, all these donations and all this lobbying effort, millions and millions of dollars? Well, that's because government is too big and the politicians are yielding to the temptation of being influenced by money. But then they come along and they say, well, there's too much money and too many special interests, so therefore we have to write another law and say people can't do that. But his point is, okay, let's say corporations and individuals can't spend a penny. Well, it would go underground. They would spend it one way or the other. But the whole thing is, let's say you take all the corporations out of the money and all the private money out, then you still have the media. Then you have the left wing and the right wing on their news and their corporations. Why should they have a free ride on this? And so I would say that you don't solve the problem by more regulations telling people how to spend their money. You do it by shrinking the size of government. So there's no incentive to go to the auction. That's what government is a big auction, auctioning off all the benefits and all the privileges. And unless you have purity of thought of everybody in Washington, believe me, that problem is going to exist. The answer is going to be the shrinking of government, but just to regulate private financing and then allowing the corporations who run all the TV companies, then they would have free reign.
Preston joins us from New York, on our Independence line. Good morning, Preston.
Good morning, Libby. How are you doing?
Good. Go on right ahead with Congressman Paul.
Hi, Congressman Paul. I want to echo the spirit of that earlier tweet that you had, and I agree with Richard to some extent. Here's what I don't get, Congressman Paul. You want congressional oversight of the Fed, right?
That is correct.
Okay, Congress. Sir, Congress is broken. What are you thinking? It's so locked up by politics that it's almost completely dysfunctional. I don't get it. I'll tell you what, I will accept that Congress can have oversight of the Fed when Congress can get its act together. The first thing Congress should be concentrating on is on something like more realistic, like lobbying reform or campaign finance reform. That's far more realistic and doable even in this ridiculous environment we have now. I think it's more important. Why don't you try something radical by, like, working with Jack Abramoff or something. Team up with that guy who seems to have really turned his life around and is really focused on lobbying, and nobody knows it better than he does. Why don't you take the lead on something like this? You're just not going to get this oversight of the Fed through, sir.
Oh, well, I think you're finding an excuse to duck the issue. Yes, I think Congress does have a lot of shortcomings, but if you're going to straighten out Congress, just straighten them up and have them do their responsibility. Matter of fact, the GAO is one of the few agencies of government that has a half-decent reputation. So I would say that's your best goal. I mean, you don't have the members of Congress actually doing it. What you have is a GAO doing an audit and giving this information. So just to say because Congress is inept, sure, they've been inept for 100 years on monetary policy. That doesn't mean we should say, oh, we can't do it. We'll just let them go ahead and do this. No, forever and ever. So, yes, they do have shortcomings, but I believe that you don't just renege on your responsibility because you can't get good results.
David, Democrats line, Birmingham, Alabama. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Mr. Paul, I find you rather disingenuous. You drop Social Security, but you're against Social Security programs. Also, you are against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But another thing I would like to say, what you were saying, I found out that you also have a lot of money invested in gold. So basically what you people are doing, you are looking out for your own interests. The United States is not bankrupt. It can print money anytime it wants to. It's different from Greece and the Eurozone. The Eurozone is invested. Also, the price of gold has nothing to do with the dollar. The dollar is based on oil, the price of a barrel of oil, which is being manipulated by China because China has previously went in, has contracts where it has a fixed price on a barrel of oil, such as $20. When its price rises, it stays at that price. This is the difference. Thank you.
What is his question?
So it's about the Civil Rights Act.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia. Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no.
On this vote, the yeas are 238, the nays are 177. The previous question is ordered. House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Speaker, if I could ask for unanimous consent to speak out of order for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here with a lot of sadness with my friends from the Colorado delegation. Democrats and Republicans were a pretty tight-knit group. We had a terrible incident in Aurora, Colorado on Friday. You all are well aware of it. 12 people were killed, 58 were wounded, and it is with sadness and grief that we come before you today. As our governor said at the vigil on Sunday night, we will remember these 12 and those who were shot. But there was a silver lining in this very, very dark moment in the history of Colorado. And we saw bravery and selflessness and heroism among the people that were in that theater that night. And any one of us can tell you stories of how people
to complete strangers were willing to give up their own lives to save the life of the stranger next to them. And, you know, in times when it is difficult like that, you want to find bright spots, and there were many. Another bright spot was the courage demonstrated by the Aurora Police and the Fire Department and the FBI and the ATF in the face of what was a monstrous action by this guy. In Colorado, we consider ourselves to be pretty tough. Aurorans, where this act took place, pretty tough. It hurts. We all hurt. But we're resilient and we'll get through it. And the stories that some of those who are injured are sharing actually really do lighten the day. And I know any one of us would be happy to talk to you all about that. But there has been a tremendous outpouring of sympathy and condolences and compassion from all of you. And I know I speak on behalf of our entire delegation to thank you for thinking about us and where we live in our community, because we are in this together, and we just thank you very much. So I ask that all of you stand with me and our delegation in a moment of silence to honor the memory of those that were killed, the wounded victims, and all Americans during this time of healing. And as I said once before, and as our governor said, we will remember these people who were hurt, and we will help them all along the way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. From Florida.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The House moves on to the rule vote for two bills. One bill would replace the current Interior Department offshore oil drilling plan, increase the drilling leases from 15 to 29. That bill will get an hour of general debate and 8 amendments to be considered if the rule is approved. That rule also includes consideration of a bill reducing federal regulations. That bill likely will be debated later in the week. Later today, the House will also debate Congressman Ron Paul's bill calling for an audit of the Federal Reserve. Congressional Budget Office has done a bit of an audit on the health care law. Congressional Quarterly reporting this afternoon that the CBO says the cost to the government will be reduced by $84 billion in light of the Supreme Court decision last month to mostly uphold the law. The Congressional Budget Office reported today, along with the Joint Committee on Taxation, that the health law will have a net cost of $1.168 billion from 2012 through 2022, compared with the $1.252 billion estimate before the court decision. That's from the CBO. The Senate is in today. They continue consideration of both a Democratic and Republican proposal dealing with the expiring 2001 and 2003 tax cuts. We expect some procedural action on that tomorrow in the Senate. You can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2.
1 minute. Have all members voted? Any member wish to change the vote? On this vote, the yeas are 244, the nays are 170. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. House will be in order. You got Michigan over here. That's ISO. Thank you. Would members clear the aisles, clear the well, take your conversations off the floor so that the House can be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 459 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 441, H.R. 459, a bill to require a full audit of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve Banks by the Comptroller General of the United States before the end of 2012 and for other purposes.
Gentleman is correct. Once again, would members kindly clear the aisles and the well? Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 459, the Federal Reserve Transparency Act, directs the GAO to conduct a full audit of the Federal Reserve. The Dodd-Frank legislation mandated a GAO audit of the Fed, but that audit issued by the General Accountability Office in July of 2011 focused solely on the issues concerning emergency credit facility. GAO remains restricted under the current law from conducting a broader audit of the Fed that includes, for instance, a review of the Fed's monetary policy operations and its agreements with foreign governments and central banks. The bill remedies this statutory permitting GAO, the investigative arm of Congress, to conduct a nonpartisan audit that will review all of these transactions. The findings of the audit are to be reported to Congress. In particular, it is appropriate that we consider this legislation at this time. While Congress should not manage or micromanage details of monetary policy, it needs to be able to conduct oversight of the Fed. The Fed was created by Congress to be the central bank, independent of the influence of the U.S. Treasury. It has never and was never intended to, in fact, be independent of Congress or independent of the American people. In recent years, the Fed's extraordinary interventions into the economy's fiscal markets have led some to call into question its independence. We do not ask for an audit for that reason. We ask for an audit because the American people ultimately must be able to hold the Fed accountable, and to do so, they must know, at least in retrospect, what the Fed has done over these many years that it has been without an audit. That is why I support H.R. 459, a bipartisan bill with mine and 273 other co-sponsors. I urge my colleagues' support, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Members are reminded not to traffic the well while another member is under recognition. Gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, when the sponsors of the bill talk about auditing the Federal Reserve, they don't mean a traditional audit. An outside independent accounting firm already audits the Federal Reserve's annual financial statements, and GAO already is empowered to review the Fed's financial statements and a broad range of its functions. In fact, the Wall Street reform legislation Democrats passed last Congress expanded the types of audits GAO can conduct, as has been mentioned by Mr. Issa. So there is transparency and accountability when it comes to the Federal Reserve's finances and operations. However, this bill would instead jeopardize the Fed's independence by subjecting its decisions on interest rates and monetary policy to GAO audit. The Fed, like every other major central bank in the world, is independent, and Congress has rightly insulated the Fed from short-term political pressures. I agree with the Chairman Bernanke that congressional review of the Fed's monetary policy decisions would be a, quote, nightmare scenario, especially judging by the track record of this Congress when it comes to governing effectively and intervening in the courts and other areas. We don't have to look any further than the Congress's unnecessarily taking the country to the brink of default last summer in a display of politics. All of us, Mr. Speaker, want transparency. All of us here want to make sure that the Federal Reserve is working to carry out the economic goals of the American people, which are maximum employment and price stability. But that's not what this bill is about. This bill increases the likelihood that the Fed will make decisions based on political rather than economic considerations. And that is not a recipe for sound monetary policy. I urge my colleagues to defeat this bill and preserve the independence of the Fed so it can keep our currency stable and cultivate the best conditions for our economy to grow and create jobs. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we in Congress have shown too frequently our inability in a political environment to make tough choices. That failure has led us in part to where we are today. I urge my colleagues to defeat this unwarranted, unjustified, and dangerous legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, it's now my honor to yield time to the author of this bill, the gentleman from Texas, the man who understands that not knowing should never be an answer, Mr. Paul.
Gentleman from Texas
2 minutes.
Is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise, obviously, in strong support of this legislation. I don't know how anybody could be against transparency, and they want secrecy, especially when the secrecy is to protect individuals who deal in trillions of dollars, much bigger than what the Congress does. And these trillions of dollars bail out all the wealthy, rich people, the banks and the big corporations, international, overseas banks, bailing out Europe, dealing with central banks around Europe and different places. And to say that we should have secrecy and say that it's political to have transparency, well, it's very political when you have a Federal Reserve that can bail out one company and not another company. That's pretty political. I think when people talk about independence and having this privacy of the central bank, it means they want secrecy. And secrecy is not good. We should have privacy for the individual, but we should have openness of government all the time. And we've drifted a long way from that. The bill essentially removes the prohibitions against a full audit. To audit, we should know what kind of transactions are. We should know about the deals that they made when they were fixing the price of LIBOR. These are the kind of things that have gone on for years and we have no access to. So Congress has this responsibility. We're reneging on our responsibility. We have the responsibility and we have not done it. So it is up to us to reassert ourselves. The Constitution is very clear who has the responsibility, but the law conflicts with the Constitution. The law comes along and says the Congress can't do it. Well, you can't change the Constitution, prohibit the Congress from finding out what's going on by writing a law. And this is what has happened. So it is time that we repeal this prohibition against the full audit of the Federal Reserve. We deserve it. The American people deserve it. The American people know about it and understand it, and that's what they're asking for. They're sick and tired of what happened in the bailout and where the wealthy got bailed out and the poor lost their jobs and they lost their homes. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 4 minutes to the distinguished ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, Mr. Frank.
Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is a bad idea, and I'm somewhat confused. By the way, we will be debating tomorrow a bill which restricts rulemaking, and it exempts the Federal Reserve as I read it. So we're kind of on again, off again about the Federal Reserve. It seems to me what we're talking about is taking some fake punches at the Federal Reserve, but not doing anything serious. My Republican colleagues brought up a reconciliation bill that was going to subject the Consumer Bureau to appropriations. So I offered an amendment to subject the Federal Reserve to appropriations. That was voted down. So we're not going to restrict their rulemaking. We're not going to subject them to appropriations, even though that's being done elsewhere. We're going to audit them, which is a way to look tough without really being tough. Did the gentleman want me to yield?
I would.
I'll yield.
I thank the gentleman. Would you suggest that we should do both of those? And then
no, I will take back my time and say we should do none of them. I was saying that I have a consistent position. I don't think we should do any of them. What I'm saying is people who get up there and beat their chest about how tough they are and they're not afraid of the Federal Reserve, but exempt it from their great rulemaking bill, and subject the Consumer Bureau, that terrible threat to the well-being of Americans, to the appropriations process, but let the Federal Reserve, which spends about 150 times as much, go free, I am inclined to doubt their seriousness. Not their purity, that would be a violation of the rules, but their seriousness. This is a way to shake your fist at that big bad Fed, and it's not a good way. We hear a lot about uncertainty. Remember, the Federal Reserve is now subject to a complete openness about all of its transactions with private companies. We did that last year. The gentleman from Texas had a major role in that. When the Federal Reserve deals with any other institution, we know what it does. We don't know it necessarily the same day. There were these predictions about what terrible things were going to happen when the Federal Reserve did this and that. They haven't come true. Maybe they will someday, but we will know it. This makes this exception. It says that we will audit the decisions about monetary policy. It says that members who vote on what the interest rate should be will now be audited. They will be subject to being quizzed about why they did that. Now, I will tell my Democratic friends, understand that one part of this problem is the objection on the part of the Republican Party to the fact that our Federal Reserve, unusual among central banks, has a dual mandate. They are charged under our statute to be concerned about inflation and about unemployment. Now, the Republicans have an agenda they're keeping on low key until next year. They got a bill, but they won't act on it yet. But they would like to strip that part of the mandate. They would like the Federal Reserve to be only involved in inflation. They don't like the notion that the Federal Reserve deals with unemployment. And this is a way that if it were ever to become law, no one thinks it is. This is a, look how tough we are. We're going to wave our fist at the Fed. But it would be a way to kind of put pressure on members of the Open Market Committee and see, well, were you worried about unemployment when you did this? That's the audit. This has nothing to do with how they spend their money. It has nothing to do with whom they contract. That's what people usually think about audit. It doesn't have anything to do with the way in which they are, whether they're efficient or not. It's an ideological agenda by a group of people who didn't like what the Federal Reserve was doing under, by the way, George Bush. There was reference to the bailouts, which were, of course, under the Bush administration. One of the things we did, by the way, in our bill 2 years ago, all my Republican colleagues voted against the bill, was to take away from the Federal Reserve the power they used under President Bush to lend $85 billion to AIG. We rescinded that. I don't think Mr. Bernanke, a Bush appointee, was doing the wrong thing necessarily, but we took back that power. So this is partly a show, because on the two serious efforts to curtail the Fed's powers, my Republican colleagues aren't there. But secondly, and as I said, I'm consistent. I don't think we should do any of these things. I think what we did with regard to openness makes sense. I'm not pretending to be tough when I'm not.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
But what it will do is destabilize. We have worries about expectations. There is a fear that we will be too inflationary or that we won't grow enough. People on Wall Street are not as sophisticated as some people think. They're not even sophisticated about their own business, as we know. But they will read this and take it more seriously than the members here do, who think it might eventually become law. And it will destabilize some of the financial system. They will see it as political interference, not with the contracting procedures, not with the budget, not with how many cars they have, but with how they decide on interest rates. And the perception that the Congress is going to politicize the way in which interest rates are set will in itself have a destabilizing effect. And as I said, nobody here thinks it's ever going to become law, but there is this fear on the part of others who don't know that will translate into precisely the kind of uncertainty, precisely the kind of unsettling on investments that my Republican colleagues pretend to fear, and it will also send them the message, stop worrying about unemployment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California.
As I introduce my good friend and leader on this issue, Mr. Chaffetz, I might note that when the word Republican and Democrat are used in this hall, hopefully when there's 45 Democratic members on this bill as co-sponsors, we'd recognize this as a bipartisan bill. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Utah.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank the chairman. I also I want to appreciate and congratulate Dr. Ron Paul for his tireless pursuit of this openness and transparency. Without his leadership, we wouldn't be at this point today, and I applaud him and thank him for that. Some would say that the audit that the Fed is already audited, but there are some key points where it is not. These include transactions with foreign central banks, discussion and actions on monetary policy, and transactions made under the direction of the Federal Open Market Committee. If we're truly about openness and transparency in this nation, which distinguishes them above and beyond so many others, we deserve and need to know this information. We need to also understand the imperative that is before us, because the Federal Reserve balance sheet has exploded in recent years. In fact, since 2008, it has literally tripled, gone from $908 billion on its balance sheet to over $2.8 trillion, nearly a 33% annualized increase since January of 2008. The Federal Reserve ownership of treasuries has also increased substantially in recent years, having more than doubled from January of 2008 to January of 2012, where it went from $741 billion to $1.66 trillion. Let's understand also that in fiscal year 2011, the Federal Reserve purchased 76% of new treasuries. Certainly, the American people and this Congress deserves more openness, transparency, and at the very least an audit. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this common sense piece of legislation, and again, congratulate Dr. Paul and continue to hope for his pursuit of this issue. Yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield Ms. Maloney 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
This is an absolute terrible idea. Although I am in total agreement with Mr. Paul that transparency is a virtue, I also believe that the Federal Reserve must be free of any political influence. And I'm afraid that this bill opens the door for precisely that to happen. And I don't believe that there is anyone in this chamber that thinks that what the process needs is more politics. Make no mistake, I agree that maximum transparency is necessary and desirable, and that is precisely why we included numerous transparency requirements in the financial reform bill, as well as numerous audit requirements. We authorized the GAO to audit the Fed's emergency lending facility. We authorized the GAO to audit any special facility created within the Fed. And we required the Fed to issue an assessment 2 years after institutions were granted access to the Fed's discount window. We crafted those measures and more in a way that ensures transparency, but still preserves the independence of the Federal Reserve in its decision-making process in the critical area of monetary policy. But this bill, as it now stands, would provide information without a proper context, and that could have unintended consequences and have totally unwarranted effects on consumer confidence in our financial institutions. If the individual members of the Open Markets Committee know that each one of their decisions are subject to potential political pressure, it would significantly alter that decision-making process. An open door to the Federal Open Markets Committee would invite political pressures, and having decisions that are driven by politics and polling data is not the path to sound monetary policy. Decisions about monetary policy should never be based on the raw political needs of the moment, but instead should always be based strictly on objective economic considerations and guided by the twin mandates of low inflation and full employment. The unintended consequences of this bill would be to open the Federal Reserve to political influence, and that would have a negative impact on the Fed's independence and its ability to produce sound economic policy. I urge a strong, bipartisan no vote. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
It's now my honor to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.